I opened my eyes at 6 in the morning, as I had done for the last 50 years. The house was quiet, still asleep. Lowell and Tamsin had gotten back late last night, which meant I'd have to move even more quietly than usual. My 73 years felt like 100, especially in the mornings when my joints ached. I was used to that pain. I was used to a lot of things. Small steps took me to the kitchen of the two-story house in Ardmore that my late husband Barton and I had bought 46 years ago. I'd bought it with money I'd inherited from my father. Barton was never a good earner, but he was a good man. At least that's what I'd convinced myself all the years of marriage until he died of a heart attack 15 years ago. Strangely, I hardly missed him at all. Perhaps because even while he was alive, his presence in my destiny felt ghostly. I turned on the coffee maker and started making breakfast. Tamsin likes pancakes. Lowell likes scrambled eggs and bacon. Orrin only eats cereal and yogurt. And Paige, at 13, is already on a diet of grapefruit. Everyone had their own preferences, and I knew them by heart. My own preferences had long since become unimportant. The morning ritual of cooking was a kind of meditation for me. I thought about how my life had turned out, and I often found myself thinking that fate had left me unhappy. Some of my peers were traveling, painting, even starting new novels. I was stuck in the past like a fly in amber. "Mom, you didn't salt the eggs again." Lowell's voice brought me out of my reverie. My 46-year-old son stood in the kitchen doorway holding a plate. Tall, with graying hair and a perpetually disgruntled expression, he was a carbon copy of his father, just as demanding and indifferent. "I'm sorry, darling." I hurriedly took the salt shaker. "I was thinking." "What do you have to think about?" He snorted, snatching the salt shaker out of my hands. "You better watch what you're doing." I nodded silently. Lowell had moved back into his parents' house 10 years ago, after his real estate business had faltered due to the economic crisis. A temporary solution turned into a permanent one. Following him, his wife and two children moved into the house. Since then, my status as a housekeeper has seamlessly transitioned to housekeeper and nanny. "Good morning, Dulcie." Tamsin floated into the kitchen in a silk robe. In her 42 years, she was meticulous about her appearance, which didn't stop her from looking at me with barely concealed contempt. "Did you remember we're having a dinner party tonight? We'll have to make something special." I remembered, I said quietly, though no one had actually told me that. "How many people are coming?" "8, including Lowell and me. The kids will eat first." She took the pancakes I'd made and sat down at the table without thanking me. "And Orrin needs his shirt ironed for the school concert." "When's the concert?" Uh, Tonight. Lowell and I can't go because of dinner." "You'll go." I nodded, mentally rearranging my plans for the day. I could forget about my weekly visit to the library. I'd been looking forward to the new book I'd ordered a month ago. The elderly librarian, Fiona Quinn, was the only person I could talk to about literature. Once upon a time, I dreamed of being a writer, even started a novel, but family obligations left no time for such nonsense. The manuscript still lay in my dresser drawer, covered in a layer of dust, just like my dreams. "Grandma, have you seen my blue sweater?" Paige, a 13-year-old hurricane with her nose always stuck in her phone, came flying into the kitchen. "I washed it yesterday. I'll get it for you." "But I wanted to wear it yesterday." Her granddaughter was indignant. "You should have asked." I didn't bother to remind her that it was she who had thrown the sweater into the dirty laundry basket. Arguing was useless in this house. It was always my fault. Breakfast ended as usual. I had to clean up the dishes for everyone while Lowell and Tamsin got ready for work and the kids got ready for school. No one offered to help. No one even looked in my direction, like I was a ghost, invisible but useful. When everyone left, I sank into a chair and took a deep breath. My heart was beating faster than usual, and the light dizziness was an unpleasant reminder of my age. I'd been having these attacks more and more often lately, but I hadn't seen a doctor. Why bother my family with unnecessary problems? I got up slowly and pulled out my to-do list for the day. Laundry, cleaning the house, shopping, cooking dinner for 10, ironing Orrin's shirt, taking him to the concert. The list seemed endless. Life had become an endless series of chores. Laundry took most of the morning. I pulled an impressive restaurant receipt from Lowell's pants pockets. So he and Tamsin didn't have dinner at home last night. I wondered why they hadn't invited me. I knew the answer, though. I didn't fit into their glamorous lives, an old woman with wrinkled hands and outdated attitudes. A telephone call interrupted my musings. Mrs. Hubbard? I heard an unfamiliar male voice. This is Quarles Noble from the Time Pages bookstore. Your order has arrived. Oh, thank you very much. I felt a rush of joy. 3 months ago, I'd ordered a rare edition of Jane Austen, a small luxury I'd allowed myself with some of my savings. I'll pick it up tonight. We close at 7 p.m. I mentally estimated the time. Oren's concert ended at 6:30. I could make it. But no, Tamsin asked me to have dinner ready by 8. I'm not going to make it to the store. Could you hold it till tomorrow? I asked hopefully. Of course, Mrs. Hubbard. Tomorrow. I hung up the phone and went back to doing laundry, trying not to think about the fact that I'd put my desires on hold again. How many times in my life had I said that word later? Later I'll write a book. Later I'll go traveling. Later I'll take care of myself. That later never came. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was done with the cleaning and started making dinner. My head was still a little dizzy, and I chalked it up to fatigue. I'd been getting tired faster in recent years, though I tried not to show it. Whenever I mentioned health problems, Tamsin would roll her eyes and talk about how hard it was to talk to old people who were always complaining about their ailments. At 4, I went to the store to get the missing groceries. Tamsin left the list, but not the money. I had to pay for it out of my meager pension, which I'd spent almost entirely on general expenses. No one was interested in what I was living on. On my way home, I ran into Monica Stevens, a neighbor I'd once been friends with. Dulcie, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you? I'm fine, thank you, I said automatically. I hear your son and his family are staying with you. It must be hard, huh? No, it's not, I tried to smile. It's nice to have a house full of life. Monica looked at me doubtfully. You know, my sister let her son stay with her temporarily, too. It's been 5 years and they're not thinking of moving out. They use her as a free babysitter and housekeeper. I averted my gaze, feeling the color flood my face. Was this really what my situation looked like from the outside? But I'd agreed to it, offered to help. I have to go, I mumbled, gripping the grocery bags tighter. It was nice to see you. Monica's words stayed in my head as I prepared dinner. Were my own children using me? I didn't want to think about it. It was easier to believe that I was needed, that I fulfilled an important role in the family. But deep down, I knew the truth. By 6 o'clock, I took Oren to the concert. My 16-year-old grandson stayed on the phone the whole way, answering my questions with one-word answers. I tried to get him to talk to me, asking about school, friends, music, but all I got in response was normal and nothing much. He was so much like his father when he was young, just as withdrawn and unfriendly. The concert was longer than I expected. I glanced nervously at my watch, realizing that I wouldn't be able to finish dinner in time for the guests. My head was spinning more and more, and dark spots danced in front of my eyes, but I put it down to the heat in the hall. By the time we got home, it was 7:30. Tamsin met us on the doorstep, her face contorted with rage. Where the hell have you been? The guests are coming in half an hour and dinner's not ready. The concert took too long, I said quietly, taking off my coat. I'll be right back. Hurry, she hissed, and turned on her heels and went into the living room. I hurried into the kitchen, trying to ignore the growing pain in my chest. My hands shook as I chopped vegetables for the salad. Just fatigue, I convinced myself, though an inner voice screamed that it was something more serious. Lowell came into the kitchen as I was taking the roast out of the oven. Mom, did you forget to buy wine? His tone didn't bode well. Tamsin didn't put it on the list. I tried to straighten up, but the room suddenly spun. You should have known. He shook his hands. How can you be so stupid? Now I'll have to go to the store just before the guests arrive. His words hit me harder than the pain in my chest. Stupid. That's how he saw me. A stupid old woman who couldn't do the simplest errand. I opened my mouth to object, but I couldn't get enough air. The dark spots in front of my eyes widened. Lowell, I whispered, grabbing the edge of the table. I feel sick. He looked at me with irritation. Don't start. We have company in 20 minutes. No time for your. I didn't hear the end of the sentence. I didn't hear the end of the sentence. The pain in my chest became unbearable, as if someone had clenched my heart in a fist. My legs gave out, and I slowly sank to the floor. The last thing I remembered was my son's frightened face, leaning over me, and his voice suddenly thin and childlike. Mommy, Mommy. And then came the darkness. I swam in the dark. Voices came through the water, muffled, indistinct. Periodically, I was thrown to the surface of consciousness, and then I saw a white ceiling, blurred figures in robes, heard the beeping of instruments. Then the darkness drew me back into its depths. I don't know how long it lasted, hours or days. Time lost its meaning. When I finally came to my senses, I found myself lying in a hospital room, entangled in wires and tubes. The pungent smell of antiseptic hit my nose. I tried to lift my arm, but it felt heavy, like it was filled with lead. You awake? A young nurse leaned over me. Don't try to move, Mrs. Hubbard. You're in intensive care after a massive heart attack. A heart attack. The words sounded like a judgment. I remembered the pain in my chest, the dizziness, and the darkness in the kitchen. So it was serious. How much? My voice sounded like a crow cawing. You've been here for 3 days. The nurse adjusted the IV. Your condition was critical, but you're improving. Dr. Flint will be here shortly. 3rd day. I've been in the ICU for 3 days, teetering between life and death. Where's Lowell? Tamsin? The grandkids? Why aren't any of them around? My family. Your son came by yesterday. The nurse looked away. Not for long. Said he'd try to stop by today, too. He would. As if visiting a dying mother were an optional item on a to-do list that could be skipped if there were more important things to do. My name is Enid Darrow, the nurse introduced herself, filling out some paperwork. I'll be taking care of you on the day shift. Enid looked younger than I'd first thought, perhaps 35. Her red hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and the corners of her eyes were already showing the first wrinkles from her frequent smiles. She had a kind of inner strength and quiet confidence, qualities I'd always lacked. Thank you, I whispered, and fell back into sleep. The next awakening was clearer. It was a gray day outside the window, the rain drumming on the glass. I lay there and watched the drops dripping down the glass, forming bizarre patterns. It was so strange to be on the verge of death and yet notice such small things. My thoughts flowed slowly like molasses. I thought about my life, about how the years had flown by. What had I accomplished? Raised a son who barely bothers to visit me in the hospital. Devoted myself to a family that treats me like a free servant. Gave up my dreams for others and ended up broke. I wonder if anyone has noticed my absence from home. Who cooks the meals? Who does the laundry? Who picks Paige up from ballet school? Or is Tamsin finally starting to fulfill her motherly duties? The doctor entered the room, a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes. Mrs. Hubbard, I'm Dr. Flint. He took my chart. How are you feeling? Like a truck ran over me, I tried to joke. He didn't smile. You had a massive myocardial infarction. We performed emergency surgery, put in a stent. You've been stabilized, but you have a long recovery ahead of you. At your age, a heart attack is serious. I nodded, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. Heart attack, surgery, stent. All those words sounded scary. When would I be able to go home? 10 to 14 days at the earliest, provided you're doing well, the doctor noted in the chart. You'll need constant care and supervision for the first time after discharge. Do you have someone who can take care of you? I thought of Lowell and Tamsin, imagining their reaction to having to take care of me, and I cringed. Yes, I lied. My family. The doctor nodded and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared at the empty walls of the room and thought about how similar they were to my life. Just as white, sterile, devoid of color and personality. I had lived 73 years, and what could I remember? What had I left behind? The day stretched on slowly. Enid came by a few times to take my blood pressure, to change my IV, to help me eat a little. She was the only person who spoke to me not as a diagnosis, but as a person. Do you have any pictures of your family? She asked, helping me up on the pillows. No, I shook my head. Lowell hadn't thought to bring any. What about grandchildren? How many do you have? Two. Oren, 16, and Paige, 13. That's a wonderful age, Enid smiled. They must be very worried about their grandmother. I didn't say anything. I doubted my grandchildren had noticed my absence at all, except in the context of unwashed dishes and uncooked dinner. I had a wonderful grandmother, too, Enid continued, adjusting my pillow. She taught me everything: cooking, sewing, a love of books. I was 20 when she died, and I still miss her. I wondered, would Oren and Paige miss me when I died? Would they even remember me? What mark had I left on their lives besides stacks of ironed laundry and home-cooked meals? My musings were interrupted by a knock on the door. Lowell stood on the doorstep, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase in his hand. He looked like he'd dropped in for a business meeting in between other, more important matters. Mom? He shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. How are you? Alive, as you can see. I tried to smile. Lowell sat on the edge of the chair by the bed, keeping his coat on. Clearly, he didn't plan on staying long. The doctors say you're feeling better. That's good. An awkward silence hung between us. Once upon a time, when Lowell was little, we were close. I read him stories, kissed his broken knees, protected him from his father's strictness. Where did that closeness go? At what point did my son become a stranger? How are things at home? I asked to break the silence. Fine, he shrugged. Tamsin had hired an au pair, temporary, so I'd already been replaced. They didn't even wait for me to get better. How are the kids? They're fine. Paige says hi. Lowell looked at his watch, and I realized he wasn't mentally here anymore. Listen, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something, he coughed. Tamsin and I booked a vacation in the Maldives, 2 weeks. It's all paid for, impossible to cancel. I blinked, not believing what I was hearing. A vacation? Now? Yes, the flight leaves in 3 days. He avoided looking me in the eye. It was planned a long time ago, before your incident. Non-refundable tickets, expensive hotel, the incident. He called my heart attack an incident, as if I'd just broken a cup or knocked over sauce on the tablecloth. What about me? My voice sounded pathetic even to my own ears. You'll be in the hospital under the care of doctors, and when we get back, I'll take you home, he said as if he were doing me a favor. Tamsin thinks we both need this vacation after everything that's happened. Stress, you know. Stress. They're stressed. I'm just an incident. I understand. I turned away from the window so he wouldn't see the tears welling up in my eyes. Great. Lowell stood up, clearly relieved that the unpleasant conversation was over. I gotta get to the meeting. I'll try to stop by before I leave. He patted me awkwardly on the arm and walked out without looking back. I stared at the door as it closed and felt something inside me snap. All my life I'd sacrificed myself for my son, and he couldn't even put off a vacation when I was in the ICU. Is everything okay? Enid peeked into the room, and when she saw my face, she frowned. What's wrong? Nothing. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. My son told me that he and his wife are going to the Maldives. Vacation, you know. Non-refundable tickets. Enid froze, clearly shocked. They're going on vacation while you're here? After a heart attack? Yes, I tried to smile. They're stressed. They need a vacation. I expected Inez to just shake her head and walk out. Instead, she crouched on the edge of my bed and took my hand. Mrs. Hubbard, let me tell you something. I've been a nurse for 15 years and I've seen things. But when a person goes into the ICU, their family is usually sleeping in the hallway, not planning a vacation. What your son is doing to you is wrong. Her words were like a slap in the face, waking me from a long sleep. Of course, I knew what Lowell was doing was wrong, but years of self-deception and rationalization had me looking for excuses for his behavior. He was always busy, I muttered. Too busy for a dying mother? Enid shook her head. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but you were close to death, and still not safe. I turned away, unwilling to admit the obvious. All my life I'd built the illusion of a happy family, and now that illusion was crumbling like a house of cards. They'll take me when they get back. I repeated Lowell's words like an incantation. But until then, who's going to take care of you in the first few days after you're discharged? Enid looked genuinely worried. You can't be alone. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't even thought about being discharged. Who would meet me in an empty house? Who would monitor my medications, prepare my diet, help me with my hygiene? Maybe one of the neighbors. What about your grandchildren? They are old enough to help their grandmother. I grinned bitterly. Orrin and Paige, they don't even take their dirty dishes to the sink. How could they be of any help? You raised a son like that and grandchildren like that? There was no judgment in Enid's voice, just genuine curiosity. It was a question that caught me off guard. Yes, I raised Lowell. I let him become what he became, a selfish man who put his own desires before the needs of others. I raised him with the idea that his mother would always sacrifice herself for him, and he just took that for granted. I guess I've made a lot of mistakes, I admitted. We all make mistakes, Enid said softly, but it's never too late to start making things right. I looked at her puzzled. At my age, after a heart attack, what could I fix? Your attitude, for starters, she shrugged. You deserve respect, Mrs. Hubbard, and care, as much as anyone. Those simple words echoed in my head long after Enid had gone. Do I deserve respect? So used to thinking of myself as an extension of the family that I hadn't even considered my own worth. The next few days dragged on slowly. Lowell stopped by one more time, just for 5 minutes, to tell me that they were leaving tomorrow and that I shouldn't worry. Tamsin and the grandchildren never showed up. I lay in the ward, staring at the empty walls, and for the first time in years, I had time to think about myself, my life, my unrealized desires. Enid was the only bright spot in this hospital routine. She brought me books, told me funny stories from her practice, and most importantly, treated me like a human being, not a burden. Did you have dreams, Mrs. Hubbard? She asked me one day as she helped me into a chair by the window. I did, I reflected. I wanted to be a writer. I even started a novel, but I never finished it. Why? Life interfered. Husband, child, home. There were always more important things to do. More important than your desires? Enid raised an eyebrow. I never thought of it that way. I always thought that my family's wishes were automatically more important than mine. It's the way I was raised, the way I live my life. You know, Enid continued, my grandmother started painting when she was 70. Before that, she was a housewife all her life. And you know what? Her paintings now hang in the city gallery. It's never too late to start living for yourself. Those words struck a chord with me. It's never too late. Even at 73 after a heart attack with a son who flew to the Maldives instead of being there for me. What would you do if you were me? I asked Enid a few days later, when we had gotten close enough to talk like this. She reflected, I would stop living for people who take me for granted and start living for myself. That's easy to say, but possible to do, she smiled. You're stronger than you think, Mrs. Hubbard. I can see it in your eyes. Little by little, I was getting better. I could sit up longer, started walking around the room on my own. Dr. Flint was pleased with my progress. If you keep this up, we can talk about discharge in a week, he said during his rounds. Discharge. The word alone made me anxious. Where would I go? To an empty house where no one would meet me. No one would help me, no one would care. Lowell and Tamsin will be in the Maldives for another week while I try to survive a heart attack. Is something bothering you? The doctor asked, noticing the look on my face. No, I'm fine, I replied automatically. All my life I had said I was fine, even when the world was falling apart around me. That evening, when Enid came to check on me before the end of my shift, I decided to ask the question that had been on my tongue for a long time. Enid, do you think I deserve better? She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked me straight in the eye. Mrs. Hubbard, everyone deserves respect and love, especially from your own children. The way your son treats you is not love. It's exploitation. Her words were like a cold shower, sobering and painful, but there was a truth in them that I'd been hiding from for too long. What do I do? Start respecting yourself, Enid said simply. The rest will come. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay staring at the empty walls of the room and thought about my life, about how I had allowed myself to become invisible in my own family. And for the first time in years, the thought occurred to me. What if I changed everything? What if I started living for myself instead of for those who don't appreciate it? With that thought, I finally fell asleep. And for the first time in many years, I dreamed not a nightmare about mountains of unwashed dishes and ungrateful housemates, but the sea, boundless, blue, calling to new shores. I returned home in a cab, alone. Despite my coy hints, Lowell didn't see fit to meet my mother from the hospital. Tamsin and I have an important meeting with the realtor, Mom. You know business, he explained over the phone in a voice that held not a shadow of remorse. 12 days in the hospital had changed me more than the previous 12 years. Perhaps it was the forced solitude and time to think. Or maybe it was Enid's words which kept echoing in my head. You deserve respect, Mrs. Hubbard. The cab pulled up in front of a two-story Victorian house that had once seemed to me the epitome of happiness and prosperity, but now looked like a beautiful cage. The driver helped me out and carried my small bag to the porch. I walked slowly up the steps, feeling my heart pounding. Dr. Flint had warned me to avoid all stress and strain, but how do you avoid the stress of returning to a place where you're not appreciated? The door opened before I could insert my key. Standing on the threshold was an unfamiliar middle-aged woman in an apron. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hubbard," she said with a friendly smile. "I'm Dorothy, helping with the housework. Mr. Hubbard warned me you'd be back today." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Lowell had hired a housekeeper, but he hadn't seen fit to greet my mother or even warn her about the stranger in the house. Dorothy helped me into the living room and made myself comfortable in an armchair. "Would you like some tea? Or something to eat?" "Tea would be nice, thank you." Once I was alone, I looked around. The house looked cleaner than usual. Dorothy was obviously a good worker. There was a vase of flowers on the table, probably Tamsin's job to keep it cozy when guests returned. I wondered if she considered me a guest in my own home. For the first time, I looked at this house through the eyes of an outsider. Most of the things here didn't belong to me. My old couch had long ago been replaced with a fancy leather one Tamsin had chosen. The paintings on the walls had been chosen by her too. Even the souvenirs on the shelves were from her and Lowell's trips. What was left of me here? Where were the traces of my presence? Perhaps only the picture on the mantelpiece, me, Barton, and little Lowell on the beach, 35 years ago. The time when we were still a real family. I hardly recognized myself in that smiling young woman with the bright eyes. Where had that light in her eyes gone? When had I become invisible? Dorothy brought tea and homemade cookies. "Mr. and Mrs. Hubbard should be back by 5, and the children are at a friend's house tonight," she said. I glanced at the clock, just 2. 3 hours of solitude. Strangely, the thought brought relief, not anxiety. "Thank you, Dorothy. That's very kind of you." "You're welcome, Mrs. Hubbard. Let me know if you need anything. I'll be in the kitchen." Left alone, I tried to relax and enjoy the silence. At the hospital, I began to reread Jane Eyre, a book I'd loved in my youth. It's amazing how differently a story is perceived when you read it at 73 instead of 15. Now I admired not the romantic line, but the heroine's fortitude, her willingness to stand up for her own dignity even at the cost of losing everything she holds dear. Do you think I'm poor, unsightly, small and unfeeling? And I tell you I have a soul like yours and a heart like yours. These words of Jane's now sounded very different. Maybe it was time for me to realize that I, too, had a heart and soul worthy of respect. My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. I reached for the receiver but realized it was Lowell's cell phone, left on the table. He must have left it at home. The ringing stopped, but a few seconds later it started again. Could it be something important? Maybe it's Tamsin and I should answer it? I picked up the phone and saw Tamsin calling on the screen. My finger hovered over the answer button, but at that moment the ringing stopped and the phone beeped, signaling an incoming voice message. I set the phone back on the table and tried to go back to reading, but curiosity took over. What if Tamsin was calling on important business? What if there was a message to give to Lowell? I pressed the button and put the phone to my ear, feeling like a schoolgirl eavesdropping on someone else's conversation. "Lowell, where the hell have you been?" Tamsin's sharp voice came through. "Just got off the phone with Dr. Flint. He said your mother shouldn't handle finances on her own for at least 3 months. The old woman's bound to be out of sorts after an illness like that. This is our chance to take control of her accounts in-house. Call me urgently. The message ended, but I continued to hold the phone to my ear as if in a daze. The old woman, control of the bills, unhinged. Every word hit like a slap in the face. I slowly put the phone back down, feeling nausea come up to my throat. They were going to use my illness to take over my money, my house, everything I had left. My thoughts were racing frantically. Dr. Flint had never said anything like that about my financial abilities. On the contrary, he was pleased with the recovery of my cognitive functions. Tamsin lied, or twisted the truth in her favor. I covered my eyes, trying to calm down. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might jump out of my chest. The heart attack had only been 2 weeks ago, and I couldn't afford to worry like this. But how can you not worry when your own family is plotting against you? Suddenly, the house phone rang. I flinched, but didn't move. A few beeps later, Dorothy's voice came from the kitchen. Good afternoon, Hubbard residence. Yes, Mrs. Hubbard is back. Of course, I'll call her right away. Mrs. Hubbard, there's a telephone call for you. It's a Miss Darrow. Enid. I'd almost forgotten she'd promised to call to see how my move went. I picked up the phone that Dorothy held out to me and waited until she came back into the kitchen. Enid, hello? My voice shook. Mrs. Hubbard, how are you? Did you have a good trip? Yes, thank you. I paused, not sure if I should share my worries. Did something happen? Her voice was full of concern. I just heard my daughter-in-law's message to my son. They plan to take control of my finances away from me while I'm out of sorts after my illness. The words came out against my will. There was silence on the other end of the line. Enid? I'm here, Mrs. Hubbard. I'm just, shocked. Although, frankly, not very surprised given the way they've treated you before. She paused. You do realize this is financial abuse, and probably illegal. Financial abuse. Those words had never occurred to me in relation to my own situation, but they sounded right. What do I do, Enid? Do you have your own lawyer? Someone who's not related to your son? No, Lowell's always handled family matters. You need independent legal advice. Immediately. You might want to consider whether you want to continue living with people who treat you this way. Her words hit the mark. Really, why should I put up with that kind of treatment? Why did I let myself be used for years? I have a friend, Enid continued, Siobhan Ezra. She's a lawyer, specializes in elder law. I can give you her number. Please. I found a pen in my pocket and wrote the dictated number in the margins of the book. Also, Mrs. Hubbard, be careful. Don't show that you know or plan anything. Give yourself time to think things through. After talking to Enid, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if accepting the fact that my family wasn't the idol I'd imagined had lifted a weight off my shoulders. No longer did I have to pretend that everything was fine. Things were bad, and it was time to admit it. When Lowell and Tamsin got home, I was already lying in my room, pretending to be asleep. I wasn't ready to face them, knowing what I knew now. They knocked on the door, I mumbled something unintelligible, and they left. No hugs, no welcome home, Mom, no joy that I had survived the heart attack and was back with them. Just a business-like knock on the door, as if checking to see if the goods were there. The next day passed in a strange, strained atmosphere. I pretended it was business as usual, a weak, sick mother in need of care. Lowell and Tamsin behaved with exaggerated attentiveness. The children barely noticed my presence, as always. Mom, I made an appointment with our family lawyer, Lowell said casually over dinner. We need to discuss your finances after your illness. Dr. Flint doesn't think you should overextend yourself. I looked up from my plate and met his gaze. There was the wariness of a predator who isn't sure if his prey has spotted the approaching danger. That's sweet of you, dear, but I think I can handle it. After all, it's my money and my house. Lowell and Tamsin exchanged quick glances. No one says it isn't your money, Mother, Lowell said softly. It's just that at your age and condition, it's better to leave it to the professionals. We just want what's best for you, Dalsey, Tamsin added with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. You have nothing to worry about. How predictable they had been. How easy it was to read their intentions now that the veil had fallen from my eyes. I'll think about it, I replied, turning back to my food. I didn't need to show them that I'd figured out their plan. After dinner, I went up to my room, and after making sure the door was locked, I pulled out Enid's phone with Siobhan Ezra's number on it. I stared at the numbers for a few seconds, hesitant to dial it. This call could change my whole life. Was I ready for such a change? But the alternative was even worse. To live under the control of people who saw me only as a source of money and free help around the house? To die slowly in a golden cage where no one respected or appreciated me? I dialed a number. Siobhan Ezra's office, how can I help you? Hello. My voice sounded more confident than I expected. My name is Delcy Hubbard. I need counseling to protect my financial rights. Enid Darrow gave me this number. Oh, you know Enid? The receptionist's voice warmed. Miss Ezra is with a client right now, but I can make an appointment for you tomorrow morning at 10. Would that work? I wondered. How do I get out of the house without an explanation? But then I remembered that Lowell and Tamsin would be at work, the kids would be at school, and Dorothy wouldn't be home until lunchtime. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. The next morning, I hailed a cab and, trying not to attract the attention of the neighbors, went to meet the lawyer. Siobhan Ezra's office was in an old building in the center of town, small but elegant, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and plants on the windowsills. Siobhan herself appeared to be a woman in her mid-50s, with a short cut of graying hair and a penetrating gaze. She listened carefully to my story without interrupting, making notes in her notebook. So, Mrs. Hubbard, she said when I finished, your situation is unfortunately not unique. Domestic financial abuse is a common problem, especially for elderly parents. But you have several advantages. Advantages? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. First, the house is yours alone, as the deeds prove. Second, you have no officially diagnosed cognitive impairment that would compromise your capacity. Third, you found out about your son and daughter-in-law's plans before they could do anything about it. She closed the notebook and looked me straight in the eye. The question is, what do you want, Mrs. Hubbard? Do you want me to help you protect your finances from encroachment? Or are you ready for a more drastic change? I wondered. What did I really want? Just protect my money and my home, or to start a new life away from my toxic family? I think I want freedom, I finally said. I'm tired of living for people who only see me as a servant and an ATM machine. I want to start a new life, somewhere by the sea. Siobhan nodded with a slight smile. Then we need a plan, and maybe the help of a good realtor. I have one in mind, Quarles Noble. He specializes in quick and confidential transactions. I flinched. Quarles Noble? The owner of the Pages of Time bookstore? No, a realtor. Could be the namesake, though. Amazing coincidence, I muttered. Or a sign of fate. Siobhan dialed a number, and within minutes we were on speakerphone with Quarles Noble. He was an energetic, middle-aged man who was quick to get to grips with the situation. If you want to sell your house quickly and quietly, Mrs. Hubbard, I can help. I have several clients who are looking for a house just like yours and are willing to pay a good price. We could have a deal done within a week if all the paperwork is in order. They are in order, Siobhan confirmed. I checked. The house belongs solely to Mrs. Hubbard, no encumbrances or co-owners. Good, Quarles said with enthusiasm. Mrs. Hubbard, have you thought about where you'd like to move? I hesitated. It was an important question I hadn't had time to think about yet. Somewhere by the sea. Not too far away, but not too close. I understand. He paused. There's a wonderful little coastal town about 300 miles from here called Bridgewater. It's picturesque, friendly people, quiet life, and real estate is a lot cheaper than Ardmore. You could use the money from the sale of your house to buy a nice little house by the sea and still have a nice life. Bridgewater. The name itself sounded like the promise of a new life. Sounds like fun, I admitted. I could arrange a trip there for you if you'd like, Quarles offered. Look at a few options before you make a decision. That would be wonderful. I felt a flame of hope welling up inside me. In the meantime, Siobhan intervened, we need to discuss how to deal with your family. I'd recommend that you don't tell them what you're planning until the very last moment. I agree, Quarles agreed. If they know you're going to sell the house, they might try to stop you. They don't have the legal right to do that, but they could cause a lot of problems. I nodded, realizing the wisdom of their advice. Lowell and Tamsin weren't the type to give up on plans to take over someone else's property lightly. I'll be careful, I promised. But how do I explain my absences from home? Say you're at a doctor's office or a support group for heart attack survivors, Siobhan suggested. It would be plausible enough and unlikely to arouse suspicion. We spent another hour discussing the details of the plan. Quarles promised to organize a trip to Bridgewater in 3 days, and in the meantime, start looking for potential buyers for my house. Siobhan undertook to prepare all the necessary documents for the sale and help with the legalities of buying a new home. When I left Siobhan's office, the sun was shining outside, and for the first time in a long time, I felt its warmth. It was as if the veil had fallen not only from my eyes, but also from my soul. I was no longer a helpless victim of circumstance. I had a plan, and more importantly, I had hope. As I drove back home, I reflected on how strangely life works. A heart attack that could have killed me had instead awakened me to a new life. It made me see the truth about my family and myself, and gave me the strength to change what seemed unchangeable. In the cab, I pulled a small notebook out of my purse and began writing down the things I wanted to take with me into my new life. The list was surprisingly short. A few photos from happier times, my grandmother's earrings, an unfinished novel from my dresser drawer, my favorite books. Everything else was just stuff with no true value. I envisioned a house by the sea with a terrace overlooking the ocean, a place where I could write, read, enjoy the peace and quiet, a place where I would be appreciated for who I am, not for what I can do for others. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to dream of a future that belonged to me alone. When I returned home, I found Lowell pacing impatiently around the living room. "Where have you been?" he asked demandingly. "We were worried." "At the doctor's office," I replied calmly. "A routine checkup after I was discharged." "You should have warned me," he spluttered. "What if you gotten sick? Who would have known where to find you?" His ostensible concern only made me smile tiredly. How had I never noticed the falseness before? "I'll be sure to warn you next time," I promised, heading for the stairs. Right now, I needed to rest. The doctor said I was recovering quickly and would be back to normal soon. Back to normal? Lowell frowned. "Mom, you're 73 years old and you just had a heart attack. What kind of normal life? You need rest and care." I turned and looked at him, really looked at him, without maternal illusions. A tall man with an emerging paunch and bald spots, a face that was beginning to puff up from the good life and lack of exercise. My son. The man who planned to take control of my life away from me. "You're right, Lowell," I said softly. "I do need peace, and I will find it." As I walked up the stairs to my room, I could feel his puzzled look on my back. He didn't realize yet that something had changed, but he would soon, very soon. "You're absolutely right. I made a mistake." The plan was for my son and daughter-in-law to be on a 2-week vacation in the Maldives, not at the seminar. Let me correct and rewrite the chapter to reflect this important detail. I never thought that at 73 I would be planning an escape from my own home like a teenager running away from strict parents. But that's exactly what I'd been doing these past few days, methodically, carefully, with the care any spy would envy. The trip to Bridgewater changed everything. Quarles Noble had arranged it as a day trip to recover from illness. I'd taken advantage of Lowell and Tamsin's absence, who were enjoying a vacation in the Maldives. I didn't even have to make excuses. The grandchildren were in the care of Tamsin's sister, who occasionally dropped by the house, but mostly minded her own business, letting the teenagers do as they pleased. Bridgewater was exactly as Quarles had described it. A small coastal town with neat pastel-colored houses, narrow streets that sloped down to the sea, and friendly people who greeted strangers. A place where time seemed to slow down, and the problems of the big city remained somewhere far beyond the horizon. Quarles showed me 3 houses, but I fell in love with the first one, a small blue and white cottage on a hill with a terrace overlooking the ocean. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a small but cozy kitchen, and most importantly, a garden with blooming roses and a bench under an old apple tree. A place made for a peaceful old age. "It's perfect," I said to Quarles, standing on the terrace and looking out at the endless blue. "How much?" He quoted a sum that was only a third of the estimated value of my present house. I could buy this cottage and still have enough money to live comfortably. The owners are ready for a quick deal, he added. They are moving to Florida to live with their daughter. If everything works out, you could move in as soon as a week. A week? 7 days to turn my whole life around. I took a deep breath, feeling the salty air fill my lungs, giving me a strange resolve. Let's do this, I held out my hand, and Quarles shook it with a respectful smile. You're a very brave woman, Mrs. Hubbard. I shook my head. No, Mr. Noble, I've just been cowardly for too long. Back in Ardmore, I contacted Siobhan, and the wheels spun at an amazing speed. It turns out that when you have money and determination, many doors open much quicker than you think. Quarles found buyers for my house 2 days later, a wealthy middle-aged couple, the Blairs, who were looking for just such a spacious Victorian mansion in a quiet neighborhood. They were willing to pay even more than the asking price if they could move in quickly and move in immediately. There's just one problem, I told Siobhan as we discussed the details of the deal in her office. My family. They'll be back in a few days, and they're not likely to be receptive. Siobhan tapped her pen on the desk thoughtfully. Legally, you have every right to sell the house without their consent, since you're the sole owner. But practically, they can make a scene and try to kill the deal. I finished for her. Exactly. That's why I suggest we do it this way. We'll draw up all the documents in advance, make the deal before they return, and you'll be long gone by the time they get back from vacation. It was a risky plan, but I didn't see any other way out. Lowell and Tamsin's absence was a gift from fate, the perfect time to disappear without too many explanations or dramatic scenes. The next few days turned into a covert operation. I packed the things most precious to me: photo albums, letters, jewelry, favorite books, the manuscript of an unfinished novel. Everything I could pack into 2 suitcases and several boxes, which I secretly transported to Siobhan's office. Aren't you afraid to leave everything else behind? Siobhan asked when I explained that I was only taking a small part of my belongings. No, I shook my head. It's just stuff, and the things that really matter I take with me or wear here. I touched my chest where my heart beat beneath my blouse. Freedom, dignity, hope for a new life. Siobhan nodded understandingly. What will you tell your grandchildren? I sighed. Oren and Paige. They were the fruits of their upbringing, selfish, spoiled, indifferent to their grandmother. But they were still my grandchildren, and somewhere deep inside, I still loved them. I'll explain everything in a letter, I said after a pause. Maybe when they grow up, they'll understand. X Day came 3 days before Lowell and Tamsin returned from the Maldives. I chose a time when the grandchildren were spending the night at a friend's house, and Tamsin's sister, who was watching them, was away on business. The house was empty. The perfect opportunity to disappear. I set up a meeting with the Blairs, Quarles, and Siobhan at the latter's office for 9 in the morning. Everything went surprisingly smoothly. Signing the papers took less than an hour, and the money was immediately transferred to a new account Siobhan had set up for me at Bridgewater Bank. The Blairs got the keys and arranged for the movers to move in the same day. Congratulations, Mrs. Hubbard. Quarles shook my hand after completing the transaction. You've officially sold your house and bought a new one. Would you like a glass of champagne to celebrate? I shook my head. Later, I have a lot to do right now. There really was a lot to do. Siobhan and I drove back to my, now former house so I could get the last of my things and write the letter. A strange feeling came over me as I entered the spacious hallway, a mixture of nostalgia and relief. This was where most of my life had been, where I had raised my son, where I had buried my husband, where I had grown old. But here I had become a shadow of myself, invisible, existing only to serve other people's needs. I'll wait for you in the car, Siobhan said tactfully. Take your time. I walked slowly around the house, saying goodbye to each room. Strangely, I felt no regret, only calm and certainty that I was doing the right thing. In my bedroom, I pulled an old notebook with a worn leather cover out of my dresser drawer, a journal I'd kept years ago when I still believed my life belonged to me. Flipping through the yellowed pages, I came across an entry from the day Lowell turned 10. Today, my boy blew out all 10 candles on the cake and made a wish. When I asked what he wished for, he said, "For you to always be happy, Mommy." If only he knew that it takes so little to make me happy, just to see him happy. I hope he never stops caring about my happiness as much as I care about his. The bitter irony of those lines made me chuckle. That caring boy was long gone, transformed into a selfish man who couldn't put off a vacation even for his dying mother. I sat down at the old secretary by the window and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. A letter. The last thing I would leave my son before I disappeared. I thought long and hard about what to write. Accusations? Recriminations? Explanation? In the end, I decided to just tell the truth. No drama, no melodrama, no attempts to evoke guilt. Just honest words from mother to son. Dear Lowell, as you read this letter, I am no longer in Ardmore. I have sold the house and started a new life elsewhere. Don't try to find me. This decision is final. You may be surprised or even shocked. Perhaps you're angry, but I hope that somewhere deep down inside you understand why I did it. For the past few years, I've lived like a ghost in my own home. Invisible, inaudible, existing only to cook, clean, babysit the kids, and provide a roof over my head. I had become a convenient piece of furniture that is only noticed when it gets in the way or breaks. My heart attack was a turning point. Not the illness itself, but your reaction to it. You flew off on vacation while I was fighting for life in the ICU. Non-refundable tickets, you said. But this isn't about tickets, Lowell. It's about choices. You chose the beaches of the Maldives over your dying mother's bed. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty. I just want you to understand that in that moment I realized what I meant to you, and I decided I deserved more. I know you and Tamsin were planning on taking control of my finances after I got out of the hospital. I overheard a message on your phone. An old woman after an illness like that is bound to be a mess, your wife said. That also helped me make my decision. I'm not angry with you. You're just the way you are. It's my fault too. I let it happen. I didn't set boundaries. I taught you to see me as a servant, not a person with her own desires and dreams. That's all changed now. I'm starting a new chapter of my life at 73 after a heart attack, thinking only of myself for the first time in a long time. It's frightening and inspiring at the same time. Don't worry about me. I'm safe. I have money and a roof over my head. We may never see each other again. Or maybe someday, if you really change and learn to respect others, our paths will cross again. I wish you, Tamsin, and the kids all the best. I hope you find the happiness I've been searching for so long and finally found in freedom. Love, your mother, Dalsey. I reread the letter twice, folded it, and put it in the envelope. Not a tear fell on the paper, not a muscle in my face quivered. I felt surprisingly calm, as if all the emotions, anger, resentment, frustration, were in the past, and there was only clarity in the present. Placing the envelope on the dining room table where Lowell would be sure to notice it, I took one last look around the house. The Blairs would be arriving with the movers in a few hours. By tonight, a new family would be living here, arranging their furniture, creating their memories. Hopefully happier than my last few years. Ready? Siobhan asked as I stepped out onto the porch with the last of my bags. More than ready, I smiled and didn't look back as I got into the car. We stopped by Siobhan's office to pick up the rest of my things, then to the bank to get a power of attorney for my assets. In case something happened to me, everything was to go to the charity, not Lowell. And finally made the long drive to Bridgewater. The drive took almost 5 hours. I stared out the window, watching the scenery change from city streets to suburbs, then fields and forests, and finally the sea glistening in the setting sun. With every mile I traveled, I felt the weight fall from my shoulders, the wings spreading behind me. Just before entering Bridgewater, Siobhan stopped the car at a viewpoint. It was a small town below tiny houses, narrow streets, a small harbor with boats. "Your new home," she said, nodding at the blue and white cottage on the hill. Even from a distance, it looked like my dream come true. "Thank you, Siobhan." I squeezed her hand. "For everything." "You're welcome, Mrs. Hubbard. You deserve it." When we pulled up to the cottage, Quarles was waiting for us on the porch with the keys and a bottle of champagne. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hubbard." He smiled broadly. Home. The word sounded different than it had before, not as a reference to a place where you lived with your family, but as a promise of a haven where you could finally be yourself. Inside, the cottage was even cozier than I remembered. The previous owners had left some of the furniture: a comfortable sofa, bookshelves, an antique sideboard, a bed with a soft mattress. But the main treasure was the terrace overlooking the ocean. I stepped out onto it and took a deep breath of the salty air. "Do you like it?" Quarles asked, handing me a glass of champagne. "It's paradise," I replied sincerely. We drank to a new home and a new life. Siobhan and Quarles helped me unload my things, showed me how the heating worked and where the meters were, and gave me the phone numbers of the local doctor, cab, and convenience store. "Enid said to tell you she'll come by tomorrow," Siobhan said before she left. "She's taking a week's vacation to help you get settled in." I nodded gratefully. Enid was the one person from my past life that I wanted to keep in touch with. She was the one who had helped me see the truth and find the strength to change my life. When Siobhan and Quarles left, I was alone in the quiet of my new home. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. No obligations, no expectations, no need to conform to other people's ideas of what an elderly mother and grandmother should be. I unpacked my most precious possession, the old typewriter I had bought when I was young, dreaming of being a writer. I set it on the table by the window, tucked in a sheet of paper, and typed for the first time in 40 years. Chapter 1, Rebirth. Outside, the ocean rumbled, and inside, I was finally at peace. I was home. Lowell and Tamsin were returning from the Maldives, rested and tanned. 2 weeks of luxury vacationing on white sand beaches in an all-inclusive 5-star hotel cost a fortune, but Lowell didn't spare the money. "We deserve this vacation," he repeated, ordering another expensive cocktail by the pool. The cab stopped outside their Victorian mansion in Ardmore in the early evening. Lowell paid the driver while Tamsin pulled out her suitcases with a disgruntled look. "I hope your mother made something decent for dinner," she grumbled, slinging a designer bag over her shoulder. "I'm starving, and the food on the plane was disgusting." "I told her we were coming tonight." Lowell nodded, heading for the front door. "She must have prepared something." He put the key in the lock, but the door wouldn't budge. Frowning, Lowell tried again. "What the hell was that? I think the lock had been changed." At that moment, the door swung open, but instead of his mother, it was an unfamiliar middle-aged woman in a housecoat. "May I help you?" she asked with slight irritation. Lowell and Tamsin exchanged puzzled glances. "This is our home," Tamsin said sharply. "Who are you and what are you doing in our house?" The woman frowned. "Your home? I'm afraid you have the wrong address. My husband and I bought this house from Mrs. Hubbard 10 days ago. All the papers are in order." Lowell felt the ground slipping from under his feet. "What is this nonsense?" His voice trailed off into a scream. "My mother couldn't have sold the house. This is some kind of misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." A man with glasses, apparently the woman's husband, appeared in the doorway. "We bought this house from Delcy Hubbard, the sole owner. The deal is completely legitimate." "Are you Lowell, her son?" the woman asked, suddenly softened. "She left a letter for you, said you would come and be surprised." "Surprised?" Tamsin laughed a hysterical laugh. "We're homeless and she thinks we'll just be surprised?" The woman disappeared into the house and returned with an envelope. "Here, she asked me to give this to you. I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave. This is our house now." Lowell took the envelope, feeling his hands shaking. He wanted to say something, to scream, to demand an explanation, but the words stuck in his throat. Tamsin did not suffer from such indecision. "It's illegal," she shrieked. "We're going to sue you. You can't throw us out on the street." "Ma'am," the man said patiently, "we're not throwing anyone out. We bought the house from the rightful owner. If you have a claim, you should take it up with Mrs. Hubbard or the court. Now please leave or we'll have to call the police." The door closed right in their faces. Lowell and Tamsin remained on the porch, stunned, confused, with suitcases at their feet and an envelope in their hands. "It can't be," Lowell whispered. "She couldn't have done that." Tamsin snatched the envelope from him and tore it open. "Let's see what that old witch has to tell us." She quickly ran her eyes over the letter and her face contorted with rage. "Here." She shoved the paper into Lowell's hands. "Read it. Your mother has ruined us." Lowell read the letter slowly. Every word his mother said hit the mark. You chose the beaches of the Maldives over your dying mother's bed. I know you and Tamsin were planning to take control of my finances. The old woman will surely be out of sorts after an illness like that. He felt the color of shame flood his face. She knew. All this time she had known about their plans. Where do we go now? Tamsin's voice brought him back to reality. We have no home. We have no money. All our stuff. Wait. Lowell reread the last lines of the letter. She says she's starting a new life. That means she's settled somewhere. We need to find her. Why? To strangle her with our own hands? Tamsin laughed nervously. Though if she had any money left over from the sale of the house? Her mercantile calculation was obvious, and Lowell grimaced. When had his wife become so greedy? Or had she always been like this, and he just hadn't noticed? We need to call the kids, he said, pulling out his phone, and find a place to spend the night. An hour later, they were sitting in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town. Paige and Orrin were due in the morning, picked up by Tamsin's sister, who was staying with them while their parents were on vacation. Lowell stared at the wall with a blank stare as Tamsin paced the room, spewing curses at her mother-in-law. How could she? We gave her a roof over her head, took care of her, and she repaid us like this. A roof over her head? Lowell repeated slowly. Tamsin, it was her home. She let us live with her, not the other way around. Tamsin stopped, looking at him as if he had lost his mind. Whose side are you taking? That old woman left us without a roof over our heads, without furniture, without everything. And you're defending her? I'm not defending her. I'm just... He stammered, suddenly realizing the truth. She was right. We were using her. All those years we used her as a free servant and an ATM machine. And when she went into the hospital, I just flew to the Maldives. His voice shook. For the first time, Lowell looked at the situation through his mother's eyes and saw himself as he really was, selfish, ungrateful, calculating. It was an unpleasant revelation. Tamsin rolled her eyes. Oh, don't get me started on the self-abuse. We have bigger problems to deal with. Where are we going to live? On what? All our money's gone on this damn vacation. Lowell rubbed his temples. His head was pounding. His whole life, so stable and comfortable in the morning, was now falling apart like a house of cards. I'll call Blake, he said at last, referring to his business partner. Maybe he has an apartment for rent. An apartment? Tamsin grimaced, as if the word were a swear word. After our house? It wasn't our house, Lowell repeated tiredly. And now we're going to have to adjust to a new reality. At that moment, his cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? Mr. Hubbard? It was a woman's voice. This is Siobhan Ezra, your mother's attorney. I understand you've already returned and discovered a change in the housing situation. You might call it that, Lowell grinned bitterly. Where's my mother? I want to talk to her. I'm afraid that's impossible. Mrs. Hubbard has made it clear that she wants no contact with you or your family. I'm calling about something else. Your mother has generously arranged for some of your furniture and personal effects to be left for you. They're stored in a warehouse. Here's the address. Lowell wrote down the information mechanically, his thoughts far away. His mother hadn't just run away. She'd cut off all contact with them. It was painful. Surprisingly, he actually felt the pain of that realization. Mr. Hubbard? The lawyer's voice brought him back to reality. There's something else. Your mother left a small amount of money for your children, enough to pay for their college tuition. The money's in a trust fund they'll have access to when they go to school. She, took care of the grandkids? Lowell was amazed. After everything they'd done, she was still thinking about Orrin and Paige's welfare. Yeah, she was very clear about that. Children aren't to blame for their parents' actions. Siobhan's voice was blatantly judgmental. After the conversation with the lawyer, Lowell sat staring off into space for a long time. Tamsin kept saying something, but he couldn't hear her. The only thought pulsing in his head was, what have I done? Meanwhile, 300 miles from Ardmore, in the small coastal town of Bridgewater, Dalsey Hubbard was waking up in her new home. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, painting patterns on the wooden floor. She lay in bed, listening to the sound of the ocean and the cries of seagulls, so unfamiliar after the city noise of Ardmore. 10 days had passed since she'd moved here, but each morning still felt like a small miracle. Waking up when she wanted to, not when she had to make breakfast for her family. To plan the day on her own, not on the schedule of household chores. To read a book on the patio looking out at the ocean, not snatches between laundry and cleaning. Today, Lowell and Tamsin were to return from the Maldives to find that the world they'd thought immutable had crumbled. Dalsey thought about it without gloating, but also without regret. She had done what she had to do, for herself, and, in a way, for them too. Perhaps this lesson would make them grow up and start taking responsibility for their lives. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted her musings. Enid stood on the doorstep with a basket of fresh fruit and a bottle of wine. "Good morning, neighbor," she exclaimed cheerfully. "Ready for a little adventure?" Enid kept her promise and helped Dalsey get settled in Bridgewater. What's more, she'd moved here herself, renting an apartment nearby. "I always wanted to live by the sea," she explained, "and Bridgewater Hospital is just in need of experienced nurses." "Adventure?" Dalsey raised an eyebrow. "What kind of adventure?" "The local book club is meeting tonight at Martha's Cafe. They're discussing Jane Austen, your favorite. I thought you might be interested." Dalsey felt a momentary prick of fear. New people, new surroundings, the need to socialize. But then she remembered how she'd spent her entire life turning down opportunities out of fear or a sense of duty. Never again. "It would be my pleasure," she smiled. "Give me half an hour to get ready." The book club turned out to be a small group of women of varying ages, from a local college student to a lady who was perhaps even older than Dalsey. They met once a week in a cozy cafe overlooking the harbor to discuss what they'd read and just chat over a cup of tea. "Ladies, this is Delcy. She's recently moved to Bridgewater." Enid introduced her. "She's a huge Jane Austen fan." "Oh, how wonderful!" exclaimed a gray-haired woman who introduced herself as Una Lawrence. "We've been missing a fresh take on Pride and Prejudice. I think Darcy is an insufferable snob, and Paula is sure he's just a misunderstood romantic. The discussion is lively and entertaining. Dalsey was shy at first, but gradually became enthusiastic and even quoted several passages from the novel from memory, eliciting cheers from those present. "You should join our club," said Paula, an energetic woman in her 60s, as the meeting drew to a close. "Next time we discuss George Eliot's Middlemarch. Have you read it?" "A long time ago, but I'd love to reread it." Dalsey nodded. As she walked home along the shore, she felt strangely exhilarated. For the first time in years, she was interacting with people who saw her as a person, not just Lowell's mother or Orrin and Paige's grandmother. People were asking questions about her opinions, listening to her answers, arguing with her as an equal. It was liberating. "Did you enjoy it?" Enid asked as they walked up the path to Dalsey's house. "Very much," she replied sincerely. "They're so real." "People in small towns are often more open than in big towns," Enid nodded. "They appreciate people for who they are, not for their status or wealth." At home, Delcy made tea, and she and Enid sat on the terrace looking out at the ocean. The sun was slipping toward sunset, coloring the water with golden tones. "What do you think Lowell is doing right now?" Enid asked suddenly. Dalsey sighed. She tried not to think about her son and his family, but sometimes memories broke through the barriers she'd erected. "Probably cursing me to hell," she smiled weakly. Tamsin was definitely furious. She was so proud of living in a Victorian mansion. "Don't you have any regrets?" Enid asked cautiously. Dalsey wondered. Did she have any regrets? For the years she'd spent in the service of her own family? For letting herself be used? For finally finding the strength to change things? "No," she said firmly. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't do it sooner. Wasted all those years." "Not wasted," Enid countered. "You raised your son, helped your grandchildren. Just because they've been ungrateful doesn't devalue your labor and love." Dalsey nodded, though she didn't entirely agree. She did love her children and grandchildren, but at some point that love had become a heavy burden, for her and for them. She allowed them to see themselves as a function rather than a person. And that was a mistake she was now correcting. "You know," she said, looking out at the ocean, I've always wanted to write a book. I started a novel when I was young, but I never finished it. There were always more important things to do. And now? Enid raised an eyebrow. Now I have time. Dalsey smiled. And the old typewriter I brought with me. And a story waiting to be told. What will it be about? About a woman who at 73 discovers that life is just beginning. Within a week of moving to Bridgewater, Dalsey already knew half the locals by name. The small town welcomed her with open arms. She joined not only a book club, but also a gardening group that met in the greenhouse of the local elementary school. Her art teacher, learning that Dalsey had always dreamed of learning to paint, invited her to take adult classes on Saturdays. Days previously filled with endless housework and caring for a thankless family were now filled with new activities and new friends. Dalsey read books she had long wanted to read, learned to paint watercolors, worked in her little garden, and wrote a novel, page by page. Sometimes, usually in the evenings as dusk fell on Bridgewater, she thought about Lowell, Tamsin, Orrin, and Paige. What are they doing? How are they coping? Had they found a new place to live? Did they understand any of what she was trying to tell them by leaving? At times like this, she pulled a picture out of her dresser drawer. Lowell at 10 years old, with a wide smile and sparkling eyes, so unlike the sullen, self-centered man he'd become. Somewhere in there, beneath the layers of cynicism and calculating, perhaps there still lurked that boy who had once made a wish for his mom to be happy. "I am happy, Lowell," she whispered to the pictures. "I hope someday you'll find true happiness too." And then she would return the picture to the box and go to the terrace, listen to the sound of the ocean and think about tomorrow, about how the future had never seemed so bright and promising to her. One morning, about a month after the move, Dalsey woke up to the doorbell ringing. A mailman stood on the doorstep with a large envelope. "Mrs. Hubbard? Registered letter for you. Sign here, please." She signed, puzzled. Who would send her a letter? Not many people knew her new address. The envelope was from Siobhan Ezra's office. Inside was a letter from a lawyer and another smaller envelope. "Dear Mrs. Hubbard, I hope you are settling in well in Bridgewater. As per your instructions, I did not give your son your new address despite his repeated requests. However, he insisted on giving you a letter. I have not read its contents and leave it to your discretion whether to open it or not. Best wishes, Siobhan Ezra." Dalsey stared at the second envelope for a long moment, hesitant to open it. What could Lowell have written to her? Threats? Accusations? Pleas for forgiveness? She wasn't sure she was ready for any of those options. Finally, she set the letter aside on the table by the door. Perhaps someday she would be ready to read it. But not today. Today she had other plans: a morning walk on the beach, then an art class, lunch with Enid, and an evening at the typewriter. A life full of small joys and big hopes. A life she had chosen for herself, for the first time in many decades. Stepping out onto the terrace, Dalsey breathed deeply of the salty sea air. The ocean stretched out before her, vast, changing, full of life, just like her new future. "It's never too late to start living for yourself," Enid had once told her in a hospital room. At the time, those words had seemed like a beautiful but pipe dream. Now they were her reality. Dalsey smiled and headed toward the beach, leaving the past behind and looking toward the new shores that awaited her ahead.